Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best junglers for patch 6.10. So there have been quite a few changes since the last time I did a jungle list. Cinderhulk did get a buff, Bloodrazor also got buffed this patch, and therefore my list is a little bit different since the last time I did one. So without further ado, guys, let's get into the video. So first on my list is going to be Volibear. So Volibear right now is a really strong champion, especially in the lower elos. He's a really easy champion to play. You don't even need to build any damage on this champion, and you can still deal so much because you do have your W. The more HP you get on Volibear, the more damage your W is going to do. So he just becomes a monster late game. He's pretty much unkillable because if he's got Spirit Visage and he's got his passive up, he's going to be healing for so much. And if he also does end up getting Spirit Visage and Warmogs, then he's just going to be pretty much unkillable. He's going to be regenning so much HP, so I would definitely recommend trying out Voli if you're just looking for an easy jungler to play. He's super tanky, he's super strong once you do get to mid to late game. His ganks are also really good in the early game. Once you get Chilling Smite, your ganks can be very successful because you just run into lane, smite them, you flip them back, and then you can use your slow as well. So as long as your laner does follow up, you should have successful ganks as Voli in the early game. A few cons to Voli are that he can get kited pretty easily. He is also weaker when his flash is on cooldown because his main engage tool is going for that flash flip, and if his flash is on cooldown, he's not going to be able to do that. He is also very predictable in my opinion. The one thing Voli wants to do is just go for that flash flip on the squishy target, and if the enemy team does have some good disengage like a Janna, or if they have a Zyra, then they can easily negate a Volibear's engage. Next on my list is going to be Khazix. I've been wanting to put Khazix on my top 5 for these past few patches now. The reason I finally put him on my top 5 is because we are seeing a lot of weaker early game junglers being played. Moo Moo, Malzahar, Fiddlesticks are some of the most picked junglers right now, and Khazix can do really well against those champions because he's one of the best dueling junglers in the early game due to his isolation damage. If you are going up against one of those weaker early game junglers, then look to invade on them in the early game. Try to get first blood because if you can do that, you're going to snowball really hard and you're also going to set the enemy jungler behind. He also has the gap closer on his E and the slow on his W, as well as the slow from his passive, so his ganks are actually quite effective. If the enemy laner is pushing out around halfway, then you should be able to pull off a successful gank. His sticking power is also quite nice because of his W and his passive. His ultimate stealth is really strong too for teamfighting because you can jump in on that squishy target. If you don't end up bursting them down right away, or even if you do burst them down right away, you can pop your ultimate to just stealth, and if the enemies don't have a pink ward, then you'll probably just be able to stealth away and get out, especially if you do have the reset on your E already. And a few cons to Khazix are that he is a pretty squishy jungler. If you fall behind with him, then you are going to be pretty weak because he doesn't have any good AoE damage or AoE CC. He's a very snowball reliant champion, so you just have to make sure you do have a good early game on him to be successful. Next up is going to be Malzahar. So Malzahar is absolutely insane in the early game. His clears are the best for any jungler, I want to say. He basically takes no damage in the jungle because of his W, which just allows him to, you don't even have to use a pot in the jungle as Malzahar. You can just farm the jungle, wait till you get to level 6, and once you do get level 6, your ganks are pretty effective. Pre-6 though, his ganks aren't the best, obviously, because he doesn't have any crowd control in his kit. But the reason you're playing Malzahar jungle is not because he's a crazy strong ganker in the early game, it's because his kit is pretty broken right now. His passive is really strong, especially once you do get to mid to late game. It's on a 4 or 5 second cooldown at mid to late game, so whenever that's up, it's going to be really hard for the enemies to jump on you and kill you. Your ultimate is also great for team fighting. Once you do pick up the Rylai's, then you're going to deal a lot of damage while also slowing the target, so he just has really good sticking power and really good crowd control as well once you do get to those mid to late game team fights. So overall, if Malzahar does get past pick ban, then definitely pick him as your jungler. A few cons to Malz are that he does not have a gap closer, so he can get invaded on in the early game. That's one thing you can do to counter Malz, is just try to invade him in the early game, try to get a kill on him, because he definitely definitely is not the best duelist pre-6, and he does have very weak early game ganks like I touched on before. Next up, I have Fiddlesticks. So in my opinion, Fiddle is one of the most fun to play and one of the strongest AP junglers right now. He's got really good crowd control in his kit with his fear and his silence. His teamfight is also really good because of his ultimate. It's just such a game-changing ability because even if you're behind as Fiddle, let's say the enemies are taking Baron or they're taking Dragon, if you can just use your sweeper to make sure the enemies don't know where you are and you can get a good AoE ultimate off, then that could completely change the momentum of the game, and a good Fiddle ultimate could ultimately end up winning you that game. He does also have really good clears in the jungle. He's got the AoE damage from his E, and he also does have the heal from his W, so you don't even need to buy potions on Fiddle. His passive is also really good now. If you guys don't know what it does, whenever you stand still for, I think it is 2 or 3 seconds, you're gonna gain a burst of movement speed, so this just synergizes really well with the channeling of Fiddle's ultimate, as well as when you are draining your opponents, because whenever you're done draining your opponents or when you're done using your ultimate, you're gonna gain that movement speed, which just allows you to stay a lot safer and allows you to get on your targets a lot better when you are using your ult. And one con to Fiddle is that his ultimate can be hit or miss. You want to make sure that you do buy a sweeper on Fiddle, or you don't buy, but you change your warding totem over for the sweeper, because this will just allow you to know if where you are ulting is warded or not, because when you're playing Fiddle, you want to go in the fog of war and try to get a nice ult off, but if it's warded, then it's really going to be hard to do that. So just make sure you buy pinks, buy sweepers, because that's going to allow you to get good ults off with Fiddle. And to round out my top 5 for this patch, I have Kindred. So in my opinion, Kindred is the best jungler right now. The Blood Razor did get a buff this patch, which just ultimately makes Kindred a lot stronger. She's also a ranged jungler, so she does have the advantage in a lot of matchups since a lot of the meta junglers right now are melee. She does have really good kite in her kit because she does have her Q, which is the gap closer, and she also does have the slow on her E. Her mobility is also really good with her Q. Her ganks in the early game aren't all that bad either. If she's got red buff and she gets her E off on the opponent, then she can definitely pull off really good ganks in the early game. Her ultimate is really good too if you can time it correctly and if you can use it correctly in a team fight. It's one of those abilities that can either win you the game or it could also lose you the game. So I do think because of that, Kindred is a little bit harder to play than some of the other junglers. She does scale somewhat well into the late game too, because once she does get those passive stacks, then she is going to do a lot of percentage health damage. And a few cons to Kindred are that she is a squishy jungler, so if your team is lacking a tank, I would not pick Kindred in that situation. And she also doesn't have any strong crowd control in her kit either. First on the honorable mentions is going to be Nidalee. So Nidalee is one of the best early game junglers in the game. Her skill cap is quite a bit higher than a lot of the other junglers though, so if you haven't played a whole lot of her, you're not gonna really do well by jumping right into ranked. You do need to practice this champion to be successful on her, but once you do get her down, then you can definitely do really well on Nidalee. Next up, I have Skarner. So Skarner is actually pretty sleeper OP right now in my opinion. He is a really good jungler once you do get to that mid to late game. He is one of the better scaling champions, and you really don't need to build a whole lot of damage on him either. He's kind of like Volibear, where you only need like one damage item, or you could go full tank too, and you can still do quite a bit of damage. His level 6 ganks are also really good because of his ultimate, so if you're thinking of picking up Skarner, then I would recommend it this patch. Next up, I have Gragas. So in my opinion, Gragas is one of the better overall junglers. He does have a really good early game. His mid to late game is also quite good. When you are playing Gragas, just make sure you do take advantage of his strong early game. Look to gank a lot on Gragas because you can definitely get a good snowball going for your team. Next up, I have Rammus. So in my opinion, Rammus is pretty underrated right now. Khazix and Kindred are two of the most picked junglers in the game, and Rammus does really well against them, especially against Khazix, because if he tries to jump on the back line, Rammus just has to use his point and click taunt, and then Khazix is pretty much useless. So if the enemy team does have a heavy AD comp, or if they do pick either Ka or Kindred, then I would recommend picking Rammus in that situation. Next up, I have Elise. So Elise is kind of like Nidalee in the sense that she does rely on having a good early game to be successful, and she is also a bit harder to play than some of the other junglers. When you are playing Elise, if you can hit your cocoon consistently, then you can do really well on her, but if you can't hit that when you're ganking, then your ganks are going to be pretty lackluster, and you're probably just going to end up getting outscaled by the enemy jungler. So play Elise if you know how to play her correctly and you can consistently hit her cocoon, but if you can't do that, then definitely look to practice her in normal games more before playing her in ranked. And last but not least, on my honorable mentions for this patch, I have a Moo Moo. So a Moo Moo is a pretty simple jungler to play. He is one of the better teamfight junglers. The main thing you want to do when you are playing a Moo Moo is look for that bandage toss in, get a nice AoE ultimate off, and if you can do that consistently on a Moo Moo, then you can definitely climb really well with him. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.